I'd like to thank the Observer Research Foundation and the Reliance Foundation for inviting me to speak today on the subject that I think is very important to the work that we do at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As Samir said, I'm the president of global development at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I've had the honor of working closely with our India country office and many of you over the last decade plus in what is really, I think, a transformative time for the country of India and for the world. You know, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard today already, as we gather today, India has completed a very successful G20 summit. As I was saying to the ambassador beforehand, at a time when I think only India could have pulled off such success in a year of complicated geopolitics and a fraught situation in many parts of the world, as we've been hearing about all week here at the UN General Assembly. It delivered a declaration that places development, equality, and prosperity for everyone at the very center of the discussion. And I'd like to take this opportunity to personally congratulate India on its G20 presidency and all the partners in this room who've contributed to that historic moment. This success, as I think you heard from the ambassador, has been built on the back of some remarkable development progress and innovation within the country of India. India is undergoing a significant, multifaceted socioeconomic transformation. Achievements in the areas of financial inclusion, affordable housing, access to sanitation, hygiene, piped drinking water, and electricity are very impressive. The scale of transformation is actually truly inspiring and provides valuable blueprints for the rest of the world. Ensuring the implementation and delivery of these basic but critical services to every nook and cranny is a formidable challenge, especially given India's demographic diversity and the sheer vastness of the subcontinent. However, a relentless commitment to reaching the last mile population has meant that India has confronted these challenges head on. India's extraordinary progress can be attributed to a combination of factors such as its reformative policies and schemes, critical investments in innovative technologies, continuous monitoring and evaluation of programs, and community mobilization. This approach has been pivotal in taking real-time action to address challenges and in making informed policy decisions. India's focus on rapidly delivering cost-effective public goods and services at the grassroots level is heartening. India recognizes that public goods are not just commodities, but the foundation upon which healthy and prosperous lives are built. I also believe that the government's strategic partnerships with grassroots organizations and with the private sector have also been instrumental in this regard. Their partnerships have not only effectively tackled immediate challenges, but have also laid the groundwork for inclusive and sustainable growth in the future. India's journey, as you've heard, in financial inclusion is a clear example. Not too long ago, a large share of India's population lacked access to formal banking services and was heavily reliant on cash for financial transactions. Is delivering on the government's objective to expand the provision of financial services, particularly to women, empowering them along the way. Advances in digital finance means that millions of people in the formal and the vast informal economy can now accept payments, settle invoices, and transfer funds anywhere in the country with just a few taps of the screen. This has unleashed a wave of entrepreneurial spirit, economic mobility, and gender parity, which is propelling India's inclusive growth. I'm truly in awe of India's digital public infrastructure. And programs such as the Jan Dhan Yojana and the India Stack, the Unified Payments Interface, Aadhaar, and digital connectivity, which have been the vehicles for social and financial inclusion. They've acted as a catalyst in providing access to banking services to the unbanked in India and have moved the needle on digital financial inclusion. You know, so as you've heard a little bit, the government of India's implementation of the direct benefit transfers program through the Jan Dhan Yojana have provided access to financial resources to over 500 million beneficiaries, of which an astounding 270 million, that's more than 55%, are women. India has emerged as the leading country in digital payments, followed by Brazil, Thailand, and South Korea in 2022. India recorded an impressive 89.5 million digital transactions, accounting for 46% of the global real-time payments. India's adoption of digital public infrastructure is not only facilitating seamless services to the population, bridging the gap in equity and access, but also helping the government in delivering goods efficiently, with some estimates suggesting that the government has saved more than 27 billion US dollars across central government schemes through its direct benefit transfers as it streamlined the process and removed bottlenecks. Even more inspiring is the progress at the rural level. The India Post Payment Bank has boosted the digital economy with more than 60 million monthly digital financial transactions. And this has helped in promoting financial inclusion for women in rural areas, with over 50 million customers, 48% of whom are women. Health is another example. I'm optimistic about the progress that's possible because we've seen periods of incredible advances before, where human ingenuity and technological advances were deployed to solve huge challenges. And we've seen how India has innovated to improve and save lives at great scale and speed. India has made impressive progress in health through research, development, and large-scale production of effective vaccines and effective low-cost diagnostics. India has eradicated polio within its borders, reduced HIV transmission, and has scaled rotavirus vaccine and pneumonia vaccines to prevent infant and child mortality, and responded to COVID-19 by administering 2.2 billion doses of COVID vaccination. We're proud as the Gates Foundation to have been a partner in those efforts. India's vaccine manufacturing capacity, which our foundation has also been proud to have partnered to support, has helped to address preventable deaths in India and globally. India currently meets about 60% of the demand for essential vaccines across the 73 poorest countries. Affordable housing, sanitation, and hygiene is another area that our foundation has partnered with India and is providing safe and equitable sanitation to the poor. We've been an important partner with the government of India to support the Swachh Bharat mission and are proud to be associated with this work, given the progress that's been made on access to toilets and now to the expanded focus on treatment of wastewater and toilet waste. The focus is especially critical given the climate change and water resource constraints that we're currently seeing in the environment. Swachh Bharat's focus to provide access to toilets to urban poor is a huge step forward. And I'm inspired to see the scale at which the Swachh Bharat mission is being rolled out and the focus that the government of India has brought to the safety and dignity of sanitation workers. It speaks volumes about the government's vision and commitment to such an important development agenda. Diffusion of lessons of the Swachh Bharat mission with a focus on fecal sludge management to other countries and immunization and India's prioritization of toilet usage and liquid waste management is an inspiration that the world can learn from. Piped drinking water is yet another example. As we all know, clean water is a fundamental requirement for good health and proper sanitation. It's also critical in reducing infant mortality and preventing waterborne diseases, especially among children. India's journey in providing clean piped water to its population through its flagship program, the Jal Jeevan, is a testament to the government's vision and commitment to improving the lives of the most vulnerable. One of the most remarkable aspects of this initiative is the scale and speed of implementation, reaching over 110 million rural households, equivalent to over 400 million people. That's more than the population of many countries. And I congratulate the government of India for this feat. Given the alarming shortage of water in the world due to rising population, climate change, and inadequate infrastructure, India's efforts through the Jal Jeevan mission will be key in addressing this pressing issue across vulnerable and other developing countries. The Gates Foundation remains a committed and steadfast partner with the Government of India in ensuring the achievement of its development goals. At the Gates Foundation, we recognize the importance of digital financial services in promoting social and financial empowerment. To this end, we've worked closely with government ministries and with Niti Aayog to enhance the usage of digital public and financial goods and to harness the direct benefit transfers to deliver on the health and nutrition goods. Tailor digital financial products with a special focus on underserved communities, including women and rural populations, and to close gaps in the final gaps in the access to financial services. As I've mentioned, we've partnered with the Government of India on the Swachh Bharat mission and have been emphasizing the need for safe and equitable sanitation, including waste treatment and reuse. Our strategy has centered on enhancing fecal sludge management for urban areas and promoting universal sustainable sanitation. To this end, we've been partnering with stakeholders, including government, community workers, and the private sector, implementing projects such as septic tank desludging and innovative fecal sludge treatment plants. In conclusion, the world continues to face a myriad of challenges, as you've all heard all along this week. Challenges like climate change, food and nutrition insecurity, and lack of hygiene and sanitation services. Many emerging and low-income countries still grapple with the inaccessibility and unaffordability of key services. And they can draw inspiration from India's achievements and embrace the innovations and strategic partnerships. Knowledge sharing will be key, and that's why I think we're very happy to welcome the report that's been released today. While many challenges remain, and we are yet to make adequate progress on achieving the SDGs, India's progress offers hope and inspiration. And while the country still has a long way to go, it has shown us what is possible when we channel our resources, knowledge, and determination toward a common purpose. That is to serve the most vulnerable and marginalized, to empower them, and to provide them with an opportunity to live a life with dignity. So once again, I'd like to thank the organizers for putting together this incredible convening and giving us a platform to discuss pertinent issues, learn from each other, and to drive positive change across the globe through strategic and knowledge partnerships. Thank you.
Welcome to those of you visiting. Welcome to New York. My name is Dhruva Jaishankar. I head ORF-America, which is an affiliate of the Observer Research Foundation based in Washington. It gives me great pleasure to be moderating this discussion this morning, and we have a really excellent group of panelists here to address some of the issues that our keynote speakers alluded to earlier this morning. Given that we have people from the UN, the World Bank, the US government, and civil society here, it's really an excellent panel to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals, India's progress, and some of the lessons learned, and as well as the challenges ahead. Let me start by asking, turning to Chandrika first, and you've worked a lot on the Sustainable Development Goals. Could you give us a sense of what some of the progress is and what some of the challenges is, particularly with respect to India?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to ORF and Reliance Foundation and the UN office for putting this panel together and for the invitation. We've heard a lot from the ambassador and from previous speakers on India's progress on the SDGs, so I don't want to repeat any of that. I think what I'd like to do is to just give sort of respond to this question by giving a little more texture to what has happened across the different SDGs in India and what we think about when we think about progress. So anytime that we look at these global goals and try and translate them into what is actually happening on the ground in India, we look at two things, right? We look at levels and we look at trends. Levels tell us how good or bad we are relative to the targets that we've set for ourselves, and trends tell us how quickly we're getting towards those targets. And in that context, Dhruva, if you'd asked me this question 4 years ago, the answer would be very, very different. So I think what has happened in the last few years is that several of the gains And that's not just true for India, for a lot of countries in the world. Several of the gains that had been made have been eroded because of the pandemic. But then there's another layer of, I think, distinction, which is which of those gains are easily reversible and which of those gains are lost for a longer period of time. And that'll affect what we think about the trajectory. So if we think about the SDGs broadly in the three buckets of the economic, the environmental, and the social, if you look at the economic goals, I would say that overall, relative to the rest of the world, India is doing well. I think in terms of progress towards the goals themselves, if you look at the absolute progress, clearly there had been a setback during the pandemic years, but this is one of those category of goals where recovery is possible and recovery has happened. So I think in terms of growth rates, in terms of the number of people in poverty, these are all trends that are in the right direction. I would say, though, that if we're going to take the 2030 target as being something that we really seriously want to work towards, you would still have to see countries like ours at our income level really growing at upwards of 8 to 10% year on year, consistently over a couple of decades for things like per capita GDP to double, right? That is not happening, and that is going to take a little bit of time to get there. So in that context, I would say progress has been good, and the economic growth goal really then translates very, very closely to employment and to industrialization and to how we think about our urbanization rates and management of that. So all of the economic indicators are, largely positive, setback with COVID, but likely to come back. If you look at the environmental goals, again, on paper, India is not, in terms of per capita, a large emitter, but of course it's a significant contributor because of overall size. And here what we are seeing is that there is such incredible leadership and dynamism in terms of the move towards renewable energy, the new innovations, new technologies, that this is an area where it's very, very hard to make predictions based on past performances because the technology is changing. The transitions are happening as we speak. The big question here is whether the transitions will happen fast enough and whether they will be widespread enough across the sectors that matter for us to be able to meet the SDGs. And that's a bit of an open question. When we come to the social indicators, I think the situation is much more mixed. Partly because what we've seen happen after the pandemic is on three of the big social indicators, when you look at hunger, access to food and nutrition, when you look at education, and when you look at health, there have been real tangible setbacks. And these setbacks will always affect and have affected in India the people who are in the bottom half of the income distribution. And for these people, recovery has been much harder. So if we talk about access to food and to nutrition, we know that those rates have actually sort of stagnated. They've not, I won't say that there's been a huge decline or huge reversal, but we're not seeing progress there over the last few years. If you take education, it's one of those sectors where unfortunately the gains are very, very hard to reverse. There are two parameters here. One is children going to school, whether we're talking about primary or secondary. And one of the great success stories of the country over the last 2 decades was the fact that we actually got most children into primary school. We went from rates of about 60 to 70% to 100% pre-pandemic, which is an incredible achievement. We've seen backsliding there. And we've seen that the backsliding has happened in those pockets of the population where income levels are the lowest, where children have had to leave to work, or where children have not been able to adapt to online learning during the pandemic and have just never gone back. The second parameter is learning outcomes. And learning outcomes is extremely difficult to fix because your cohort changes year on year. So learning losses for children who were 3 to 4 years old or 6 years old during the pandemic, you can't make that up. They're a different cohort now. They have different learning requirements and learning needs. So education is where I believe we've seen the greatest impact on the social goals. When it comes to health, and I'll end with that, it's a mixed picture. Over the last couple of decades, we've made enormous progress in reducing maternal child neonatal mortality. Really remarkable work over the last couple of decades. Now, COVID, of course, was at its core a medical crisis, and it put a lot of strain on the health system, but what it also did was that it directed a lot of investment into the health system. And what we are seeing after that is slow progress, but I would say fairly encouraging. And the Antara Foundation, the organization I lead, works on maternal and child health on the ground. So we see which parts of the system are working and which parts are not. I think maybe I'll stop here and then we can talk about maternal health in more detail later.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that broad overview. And what struck me was how the picture is very mixed, encouraging in some ways, major challenges in other ways, and yet the challenges, whether it's sustainability, whether it's social development, whether it's economic development, are somewhat different in each case. So thank you. Hemang, if I could turn to you actually next. When you look from your vantage point at the World Bank, when you look at what sort of delivery of public services in a place like India, what do you see as some of the major challenges remaining? We've heard about some of the attempts to leapfrog and some rather successful cases of India and others leapfrogging, but what do you see as some of the remaining major challenges to the delivery of public services?
Thank you. We all know when we talk about India, one word comes to our mind is the scale, right? The scale and diversity. So scale and diversity, they are two cardinal challenges that we can say we have. But how do you dissect that? So when we talk about underserved, scale means there are many people who are away, who are at distance, who are at distance from whether the state, rather urban development, or where things are happening. So distant becomes one challenge. And add diversity to it, because we have many languages, we have many states, provinces as we call them. So these are two issues that remain. Now let me come to another aspect to it, which I will pick from Shombi's speech and Her Excellency Ruchira Kambo's speech. She mentioned two words, determination and ingenuity. So when it comes to covering distance at times, determination is a problem. I recall one incident. Today, all of us are talking about financial inclusion and the achievements of DPI, etc. But let me go back to 2014, when I was a very junior officer in Prime Minister's office. And the first programs, if you recall, first two programs that India launched in 14 were what? First was the Jan Dhan, and the second was the Swachh Bharat. And everybody was surprised that, why financial inclusion? It's not such a big challenge. Why financial inclusion program? And that is where the question that the Prime Minister asked was, if it is not rocket science to open a bank account, why are so many millions of people who don't have yet bank account yet? So that's the question of determination. So at times I also tell multilaterals like my organization and UN that there is a lot to learn in terms of the lessons. But the biggest lesson you can learn from India and biggest challenge that you can appreciate when you go to underserved community is the determination of leadership and determination of your program. And when determination becomes the basis of your program design, you have identified the real cause of it. The second issue comes on the diversity, reach. There, the ingenuity part of India identifies answer and question both. How do you reach a person who doesn't know how to speak, who doesn't know how to push a button? And that is where use of technology now is now aiding today. But I think, let me not answer your next question, but let me tell you that determination and ingenuity are both the problem and both the solution that we should appreciate, and how India has used it since the beginning. Whether it is Jal Jeevan program, whether it is Swachh Bharat program. So how do you put that question first? That why are so many people left? Where is the problem? And there comes the last word I want to leave you with is saturation. Today, if you hear any program in the corridors of North Blocks and South Blocks in India, the word that is given to the governance or the executive is saturation. Saturate all your programs. because we are very good at setting targets, we are very good at identifying problems and issues, but we are not good at achieving them and setting a course that is achievable. So I think these are some of the issues that come to my mind. I will not bore the learned audience with the usual issues and problems that we talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can ask you from your perch at the UNDP, and you're an economist, where do you see the major challenges now? And I guess I have a slight follow-up question, maybe I'll ask it to you now, but how do you measure, I think one of the criticisms often leveled at the SDGs is that the metrics used are amorphous, are very broad, there are too many of them, but also just getting data is a challenge, and maybe if you could speak to some of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start by saying that I was part of Team UN this year at the G20 accompanying India, learning not just from the hospitality, but also from the development innovations and speaking to the global south. And I think that one issue that came up on the map at the G20 that refers to your question is the idea of growth that is inclusive and sustainable. And many economists, myself included, it's easy for us to talk about that and say that phrase. It's really hard to create inclusion on the ground and to create sustainability. And India, with 135 million people out of multidimensional poverty, with a massive renewable energy transition underway, is starting to create a paradigm about how to think about growth that is inclusive and sustainable. Coming back to the SDGs, the SDGs are often criticized for being ambiguous, or being a checklist, or being a Christmas tree. And what we find, we come back to the roots of the 2015 discussion. They're both normative and they're practical. The normative question is how to advance as much economic and social achievement possible within planetary boundaries. That's the normative challenge. But the operational challenge is much bigger, because we need to do it in each village, in each locality, in each family around the world. And that's a tremendous coordination, integration challenge. Two accelerators that India has put on the table are DPI and energy transitions at scale. So I just wanted to mention those because of the potential scale they have for other things like multidimensional poverty reduction. DPI, we've talked about many of that, the components that have to do with digital ID, that have to do with digital payments and data exchange are revolutionizing the scale and the way to achieve and to deliver services on the ground. I worked in a number of countries 15 years ago on multidimensional poverty interventions, and it would take us years to reach a village and to be able to engage with local coordinators and so on. But what India's achieved in 2 or 3 or 4 years is quite amazing at that scale. So I think that's a lesson that we need to digest and learn. Of course, there's many things that are very unique to India, the aspirational districts program, the way you reach localities, and the way that society reacts with respect to policy is very unique. So we need to tailor these to other contexts. However, the second thing that I wanted to say is on the renewable energy side, there's also revolution happening around the world, and India is part of that revolution. Just this year, renewable energies added the size of 107 gigawatts of power, which is the size of Germany and Spain together. And India is a big part of that addition this year. This is giving us hope, because despite the SDG reversals, despite the statistics that we've mentioned earlier in the morning, which are true, we need to take a look at these potential accelerators. Renewable energy is going to transform the way we get growth. It's going to create differences for every supply chain, for medium and small business around the world. So these two accelerators, digital and these green transitions, if you will, are going to create something quite different for the SDG agenda. And that's what we're focusing on right now, which is the hope side, but also learning from India and learning on the ground about how to scale that up, how to do that at a way that is truly global.
I mean, it's funny. I work on some of these issues, and my organization works on a lot of these issues, but I never really thought of them as accelerators. But essentially, that's really what DPI and the renewable energy transition are. Änjali, if I can turn to you, you've worked a lot. In different capacities, in foundations and now in the U.S. government, on the U.S.-India relationship. Could you speak a little bit about some of the bilateral collaboration underway and the role USAID is playing on the digital economy in India particularly? And then I know there were a number of elements of the joint statement during Prime Minister Modi's state visit to India that USAID contributed to in various ways. Could you speak a little bit about the role you see now for the US government in the development agenda?
Thank you. It takes a few people, several brains to make this happen. I think, thanks for the question. There's so many ways to be able to answer a number of the things we're doing. I mean, I think that this response really encompasses a number of things that all of my other co-panelists have said. What are the greatest challenges, right, that we're facing first? And those challenges specifically in India, and we look at them, encompass the diversity and the vastness of the population, which you highlighted, the most multilingual country in the world with the largest population, 28 states, 8 union territories, or over 120 languages. So how do you actually tailor make your programs? You had highlighted this, so that you can actually go on the ground and be able to meet the needs of the population first. How do you think about then the data that you had mentioned? And think about data both in terms of accessibility, its utility, and its feasibility of actually being produced. And then think about sustainability. And I think every single one of us coming into the situation as a development partner thinks about our exit strategy. And if you haven't, you should be. When you come in, what do you do to make sure that you can exit so smoothly that you've left behind not just progress, but institutions and partners to take this forward? And I would say this translates into the digital space as well, right? And we're doing a number of very exciting things in the digital, addressing the gender digital divide, which we see as being such a critical factor, coming together with Reliance Foundation specifically to say, what is one of the biggest issues for India in this time right now? And being able to do the Women Challenge Connect program, where we're saying, let's make sure that women, specifically rural entrepreneurs, women have the skill set that can, together with private sector, make them not just compatible, but competitive in this environment. And how do we make sure that we not only train them, but give them the tools, give them the access and the ability to be able to enter that workforce? And so Women Connect Challenge is amazing, and we're being able to replicate this in award grantees, and the number of people that are applying for this program tells us that the need is far greater than what we've actually been able to do right now, and how that need can spread across countries beyond India. And then I think about, some of you may have heard if you came to our session last year, the Kirana program, right? Your corner shop that's run across rural areas and led by key entrepreneurs across the country. Now we're pushing women to own these businesses, become these women-led entrepreneurship programs. And then during COVID, we realized these Kirana shops need to be run through digital means. So how do we provide the tools? So we've got digital payment systems. How do we provide the tools that they can use logistic means through digital tech? So that's our Kirana program that we're doing that I'm super excited about. I was really excited to hear Chris Elias speak because I am a Gates Foundation alum, and to be able to echo all of the things that we do in partnership. So USAID and Gates Foundation have a new exciting program in women and digital economy. So what do we do to take all of these ideas that I'm speaking about and push them further to really think about livelihoods, to really think about the digital economy and the role that it plays, but also what do women specifically play in that space? How do we make sure that women are leaders in that space? How do we make sure all of the various stakeholders, because you've got to incorporate every single one of them to reach every segment of the population, but that those stakeholders come together with civil society, with private sector, with government, to create that environment so that we can not only further this space and expand it, but we can set a model that we can take to other countries. India's done that on so many regards already, but I'm so excited that we can now take this digital economy space in a way forward that everyone is looking for us to do to set the trend on. So I want to pause there because I know you've got a number of other questions, and we've got a lot more solutions and innovations that we could be doing together. And I've got so many more examples to speak about. So thanks.
Actually, that's a great pivot to a second question I have for Chandrika, which is, we've talked about women entrepreneurs and women in general getting access to digital tools for the first time, how this is revolutionary in many respects. For those of you who may not know, we just had a session of parliament in India where we had the reservation, women's reservation, and an increase in political participation now mandated in Indian politics, which is, again, quite revolutionary. It's the first session held in the new parliament building in India. But despite this progress, one of the challenges has been addressing maternal health. and outcomes related to that, both for the child and for the mother, and the impact that has on households, including household incomes and so forth. So, could you address a little bit some of the work that you are doing in the Antara Foundation through on maternal health?
Sure, but I think before I talk about Antara, let me just talk a little bit about the public health system in India and what has been good and what has been challenging, because that has a direct implication on maternal health. And let me start with the biggest challenge, and that really is sort of overwhelming, which is that the public health sector in India is still very, very underfunded. We spend about just under 3% of GDP on health, which if you compare to any other middle-income, well-performing country on health is about that the equivalent number there is between 4 to 6%. And if you look at developed countries, that's typically between 10 to 12%. And the United States, of course, is at the far end of that at about between 18 to 19%. So we are very much underinvesting in what is a very, very key input to human capital, right? Which is basic health services. And if you look at the history of public health in India, we've had some remarkable successes. Polio eradication, smallpox eradication, the leprosy program, HIV/AIDS. All of these have been led by the public sector. So there is proof in the country that actually if you do invest and if you do make it work well, it actually does show results. On maternal health, there was a huge push in the middle of the 2000s, which started with the National Rural Health Mission and the Janani Shishu Surakshana Yojana, which actually made a huge difference to maternal mortality in the country. And we're now down to 97, the SDG target is 70, and you can see that change happen. What has really led to it? And I would say if you look at the last 20, 25 years, anytime we see success, particularly in health, but also in other spaces, there are a couple of critical patterns that we can see. The first is policy coherence and policy scaffolding. And what I mean by that is that successive governments have built on the achievements of the past. And that's a very key ingredient because health is a long-term commitment. It's not something that you can change or see results very quickly. And we've seen that with successive governments. So when there is a good policy in place, a new government comes in, they add to it, they modify it, but they don't throw it away. So that's a key factor. The second is the scaffolding, which is that you get the basic pieces in place and then you build on top of that. So if you look at maternal health, the JSSY was the first program of that nature. But along with that was the creation of the ASHA workforce, which actually is one of our biggest, I think, under-celebrated successes. We have 900,000 frontline workers, all women, not highly educated, extremely dedicated. We at the Antara Foundation work with them day in and day out. And every time I meet them, I am blown away by the commitment, by the competence, by the dedication, and by the leadership that these women show. We have the world's largest early childhood development program, the Integrated Child Development Scheme, which again reaches every single village in the country. These are remarkable programs in terms of scale and size. Yet, the outcomes, when you think about the health system and you read about the health system in the popular press, there's this perception that it's not very effective. Part of that is because the second key ingredient is we're very, very good at setting the structure. So if you look at the Indian public health system on paper, it ticks all the boxes. It's probably the best in the world. When it comes to implementation, what in a country, and I think this points to the question of scale and diversity, from an implementation point of view, what normally works is when the government does something in a mission mode, when there is an urgency, when there is a timeline, then the entire system is mobilized to actually deliver results. And we saw that during COVID vaccinations. The kind of innovations, ingenuity that were harnessed to actually make sure that the country got vaccinated. I mean, we have some amazing stories from the field on that. That ingenuity and that innovation doesn't last. So the big challenge on maternal health and public health is how do you get a very big system to consistently deliver results to every single person who interacts with the system. And that's what we do at the Antara Foundation. We work with the grassroots workers, the Anganwadi worker, the Asha worker, and the auxiliary nurse midwife. We bring them together on a common platform that we call the AAA, and we work with them to help them get smarter about how they use data, to make sure that they're not missing out on any target population, to make sure coverage is expanded to include everybody, and to make sure that they're trained to be able to actually deliver care. So it has to be done through government, it has to be done with government, and I would argue it is getting done. I think we just need to keep making sure that it gets done as quickly as possible.
That's an interesting point about the scaffolding, and a friend of mine likes to call it the Kumbh Mela approach to governance, which is like you have a mission. The Indian government can create a whole city on the Ganga for a festival and ensure it doesn't end up like Burning Man. So if I can turn to Hemang, what are some of the examples that, just on the subject of this panel in particular, so India's Lighthouse, we've talked about some of the successes, some of the challenges faced about sort of the governance at scale and with all this diversity in India. What are some of the lessons that you think can be applicable to other countries in South Asia and perhaps other countries in the global South more broadly?
See, I think India's answer to SDG, I like to put it as SMT, Society, Market and Technology. So what is to learn from India, for not only South Asia but the global South, is how India used society, market and technology approach to solve every SDG. You look at Swachh Bharat, society was part of it. I had a Facebook photo of me holding a Jadu mop and doing the Swachh Bharat mission on day one. And markets. So let us look at some of the digital public infrastructure and digital public goods that we are talking about today. They haven't evolved only because of either government or because of the public investment. A lot of market and a lot of society has been involved with that. And I like to call this structure or digital public infrastructure as now new digital utilities. Like our electricity plants, these are going to be the digital utilities. And how it got created. Interestingly, if you look at structures or institutions like NPCI, they are a mix between public sector and private sector. They are a bank association and couple of technology people come together and they have created this. So one important lesson to learn for Global South is that you cannot copy the template, but you can copy the principles. And those principles are openness, those principles of how to keep systems open, how to involve society, how to involve market, and how to involve technology. So I think these are some of the examples depending upon the sector. If you go on financial inclusion, both technology and market plays a very high role. If you go on social indicators like Asha workers and health and others, their involvement of society and how do you use technology again to reach, that becomes very important.
Just to follow up quickly on the specific instance of DPI, digital public infrastructure, I think there was a bit of a back and forth about, initially that should India be exporting India stack per se, the protocols, everything. But I think that what has come out, it seems, is more India exporting the principles behind it, which is that, so what other countries in the global South can adopt aspects of that and amend it and adapt it to their local conditions, but it won't be a copy-paste approach to India stack. I mean, would that be an example of, you would say, of following the principles rather than...
Correct. No, in fact, based on the India stack model, I think 10 countries have already developed their systems. And that is where also, again, the principles that keeping it open, involving even the local private sector, involving their knowledge and invention. And again, I'll go back to the word which I like Madam Ambassador's word ingenuity. And I dissected it while I was sitting there, what actually the definition of ingenuity is. And I realized that the definition was that being clever, being original and being inventive. So you cannot copy ingenuity. You can be ingenuine in your own way, learning the principles and adopting it in the local context. And that is where a lot of issue not between the territories, but within the territory also comes. For example, a lot of localization of our SDG requires a lot of ingenuity on ground. If you go to in India, if you go to West and if you go to East, you have to follow the principles, but you can't follow the template. So that's what I think we all need to learn from India and its success today.
If I can ask you of sort of a follow-up to sort of the same question in some ways, what are some of the lessons you think that the India experience, both the challenges, the opportunities, what are some of the lessons that are applicable to other countries in the Global South?
Absolutely. I think over the past 12 months, we've seen a shift in the way the global economy is looking at things. When 12 months ago, interest rates were just rising, only a few economies were growing at that point, developing economies. And since then, we have 65, 66 developing economies that are growing at more than 4%. And I say this because India has shown us how to create a path that builds resilience and then creates a burst of transformation during its acceleration period. And that transformation is based on policy. It's on foresight and policy. And that is quite remarkable because we come out of a convergence era since the 1980s or 1990s and 2000s, which was very much based on the integration of the global economy and on trade. And it was very market driven, if you will. But I think looking into the future, into the inclusive side of this and into the sustainable side, we're going to have to be savvier about how to adapt technology in ways that make impact over people in the real world. And that's policy ingenuity, that's innovation. And I think that India is showing us a catalog of ways of doing that. It's experimenting in ways that are quite remarkable. And that's what I take away. I mentioned the two big ones. I could get into details. The International Solar Alliance is fantastic on renewables. There are other many interesting examples, but I think this experimentation process through policy is giving us a template for the Global South, for another 100 countries to think about how do we use policy in a way that creates inclusion and sustainability. So I take that away from this. UNDP just released a report this week with the SDG Summit in mind, in which we focused on what we call the growth that we get. Many economies are growing at whatever speed they are, based on fossil fuels, based on high commodity prices, based on debt. And only a pocket is based on productivity and innovation. And India is in that pocket, and it's leading in that pocket. So we call that the development we want, because it's broad-based, it's changing the way we create outcomes and impact, but it doesn't lose the link with growth. And pardon me for saying that, I'm an economist, so I come back to the growth issue because it is important to have jobs, incomes, and to be forward-looking on that economic agenda.
Thank you. Änjali, so final question to you, and I think we may have opportunities for one set of, or are we're out of time? Okay, I think final question for you then, before we take a break. You've worked in the Gates Foundation previously, you've worked in the nonprofit sector and now in government, but the nature of development assistance has also changed, and as mentioned, you now have to bring in the private sector, you bring in market solutions to make it sustainable. How do you see now going forward the interplay between, how will you have to work with civil society, with market, with the private sector to help achieve those goals, and how is USAID approaching that issue?
I think it's really exciting.
Very hard question.
It's a very hard question. No. I think it's exciting, one, to see. In the audience, there's a number of private sector. In every single one of my meetings this week, I have seen private sector approach us about development in ways that I'm seeing a natural increase over the years. In no other time do we see this fluid approach of partnership that makes complete sense. I've got great examples of how we're doing this through USAID. We have specifically focused on how to think about private sector strengthening, how to educate the private sector about the engagement. That goes beyond, everybody touts CSR laws, make sure you're giving the 2%. It goes way beyond that. What we were able to do, and, Chandrika, you mentioned during COVID, we realized the cracks in all of our health systems globally, right? Our health systems cannot function on their own just by one government or local governments. They need this additional assistance, whether it's through logistics or whether it's through being able to figure out the last mile. And I've got a colleague back there, Hemang from IP Global, who I was so excited to support through USAID because we put together this blended finance model, Samrid. And if you haven't heard about it already, what's so exciting is that you had a number of young entrepreneurs that were thinking truly about last mile solutions. They were thinking about mobile defibrillators. They were thinking about temperature controlled shipping containers. They were thinking about creative campaigns that would reach the last mile in ways that we hadn't thought about. I mean, I saw the most interesting things, but they just weren't getting funded. And here we were able to de-risk all of these solutions by putting money forward through USAID. That's how we're catalyzing, right? In partnership with the private sector, together with IPE Global, and basically say, how do we allow others to step in the space without feeling like they're going to be at a greater loss? And so by doing this, not only were we able to raise 12x, we were able to raise so many solutions that have now reached over 20 million people to date. And so what it tells me is, yes, we were able to do this in health innovations, but why aren't we doing this in climate solutions? Why aren't we doing this in further digital technology for women? Why aren't we using this approach where it takes all of us as stakeholders with our comparative advantages coming together to figure out solutions with the local community at heart? And I turn to you, Chandrika, because localized solutions are the only way that we can think about our outcomes-based response. And so being able to do blended finance innovation models, being able to think about pay for success models that we've done, partial credit guarantees. These are all the things that the private sector is super excited about. And it brings them to the table in a way that you would incentivize, and it gives them a step forward that's much easier. It changes the game. It changes the economy, the economics of the situation. And so I'm so excited about how to take this model and take it regionally. And I'm excited about how our partnerships with the private sector keep increasing. We're thinking about right now with the USAID and between the government of India and the US government, we just announced this in the joint statement with Prime Minister Modi, is that we're going to have a global digital development partnership. And so a lot of what we're doing with USAID and MEA is really thinking about what is our trilateral approach. Dhruva, you speak about how do we replicate these great models of success in India to other countries. And we do that by really thinking about our joint innovations, our joint powers, bringing Silicon Valley with the Hyderabad and Bangalore corridors. How do we think about doing this in a way that we come together with solutions? And so this is the Global Digital Development Partnership that we're putting forward. We're taking a page from the Prime Minister's handbook and saying, why don't we do a hackathon and think about solutions that all these young private sector leaders are already thinking about for their local communities? Why don't we go to scale with them in Africa and the Pacific and whatnot? So a lot of excitement behind what's possible there, and really excited to work with all of you in the room. We see a diverse audience here. Approach each of us on this panel and think about how we can partner for solutions together. This is what these engagements are all about. So thank you.